So just so everyone knows, this is the Integrated English Literacy and Civics Education Grant opportunity that we'll be discussing. Next slide, please. And the agenda is to go over and provide an overview, discuss the eligibility requirements for this grant, discuss funding, and then the required grant documentation, and then answer any questions you may have about the grant. There's also an opportunity through up until February 11th to email me questions that may come up as you are completing the grant opportunity that we will answer and then publish on February 11th so that everyone has access to those questions and the grant opportunity. Okay, and with that, let's begin. The purpose of the grant is really twofold. It's to improve immigrants and people with beginning levels of literacy to improve their reading, writing, speaking, and comprehension skills in English. It's also to help people prepare for civics participation in the United States. I'll give you a few minutes just to read this slide. So if you have any questions, you can chat them out, but those are the two main purposes of this grant funding. Okay, and then the next slide, please. There's also two outcomes that are not evident in the purposes of improving English literacy skills and improving civics participation. And those are that English language learners will be placed in unsubsidized employment in in-demand industries and occupations that lead to economic self-sufficiency. And the other outcome that is not evident from the purposes is that you integrate with the local workforce development system and its functions to carry out the activities of the program. And to say a little bit more about these outcomes, the first one is really that the intention is to help individuals obtain employment at the end of this grant opportunity or during the grant opportunity. And the second one is really that as a provider of this grant, that you are expected to integrate with the workforce development system. And that would be here in Minnesota, the career force system. It could also be employers or community-based organizations or other entities that are in the workforce development environment, and try to leverage all those resources to provide the integrated education and training opportunity. With that, we'll move to the next slide. So this is going into the eligibility. So these are the organizations that can apply for this grant. And a key word to keep in mind, or two words, is demonstrated effectiveness. We'll discuss this more in a few more slides, but I just want everyone to know that this is something that's important, not only to qualify for the grant, but then you have to show it within the grant. So again, you can read who's eligible, and it continues on the next slide. These are all entities or organizations that can apply for this grant. I want to point out that J is a partnership between an employer and an entity described in any of the paragraphs A through I of this section. And of course, A through I are they're referring to the listing of different organizations above that could qualify if it's in partnership between an employer and that entity. Next slide, please. So what is past demonstrated effectiveness? In order for this grant opportunity to pass, once the application is submitted, one of the first things that will be done is to check on demonstrated effectiveness. And this means that whoever is applying has to show that they have been effective in providing and serving learners, English language learners, prior to submitting for this grant. And there's two chunks or two areas where you can do this, A1 and A2. A1 is to show using the performance data basically out of WIOA that traditional, if you've been funded under WIOA before, that you're aware of the WIOA data that you have to submit to the state. And that's one way you can show past demonstrated effectiveness. But you also have to show things that are currently not available through the system, or you might have just limited data around this. And that is information or outcomes for participants that's related to employment, attainment of secondary school or its school diploma or its recognized equivalent, and transition to post-secondary education and training. The data may not be as easily accessible as it is pulling it out of like the student information database, but you can use whatever data or that you may have to show past demonstrated effectiveness. Next slide, please. And then this goes on to show how you can document that. I've already talked about one, how you just use the data you already have. If someone has not been within the adult basic education system currently, wants to apply for this grant, they need to show how they have been effective in serving basic skills deficient eligible individuals prior to applying for this grant. And you would have to just use the same information that's described in A1 on the previous slide and write to that in the grant. Again, this is important. This will either move your grant forward or your application forward, or it could be declined at this point if you do not show demonstrated effectiveness, past demonstrated effectiveness. Now I'll move on to funding. So the minimum award is $20,000. The maximum award amount is $150,000. And essentially, you write for the grant, you're funded for 1 year. And depending on if funding is available, if you have been successful in meeting the work plan and you have turned in all the proper documentation and reporting, you'll be funded the continuing 2 more years. So the funding goes in total for 3 years. Next slide, please. There is required grant documentation that needs to be submitted when you access the RFP, or you're going to see an instruction document, cover sheet and assurances, application narrative, and a budget form. The instruction document is just helpful in how to complete the other forms. The application narrative is probably going to be the most time intensive because that's where you have to write out your work plan. The cover sheet and assurances and application narrative have to be submitted in Word. We cannot accept any Google Docs, and then the budget form is submitted in Excel. Next slide, please. There are some new items that we have not included in previous integrated English literacy and civics education grant opportunities. There are two new assurances. One of them is that the grantee will participate in a minimum of 20 to 26 hours of integrated education and training, professional development provided by IELCE. And that would be during the first year of the grant, which hopefully will run July 1st of 2022 through June 30th of 2023. The other assurance that was added is that the grantee will have an integrated education and training form approved by MDE no later than June 30th, 2023. Hopefully, we might see some forms come in earlier, but they have to be in and approved no later by June 30th of 2023. And then the application narrative includes a new component on diversity and equity. Next slide, please. Any questions?
Julie, there is one question that has come up in the chat regarding the requirement that grantees integrate with the workforce development system. So the question is, does an AmeriCorps Opportunity Navigator at our site count as part of the workforce development system?
No, not in and of itself. I would say, what does that AmeriCorps Opportunity Navigator do? It would not, by just including them does not mean you're integrated with the workforce development. I think what you would want to do is identify what that individual is doing to integrate with the workforce development system.
Yep, Allison is adding a little to clarify that they also partner with Career Force.
That sounds like what the grant is asking for. Yep.
Okay, another question, Julie. Can current IET programs be approved for this grant or only new ones?
No, current ones can be approved. Yes, but just remember that the entity applying has to be approved. That's the most important thing. And then the IET can be approved. So it doesn't have to be a new. If you already have an IET that is approved, that doesn't have to receive approval again. But you as an entity, the organization needs to be approved or go through the RFP process. If that makes sense. If that's not clear, please just unmute yourself or chat.
Yep, I think that sounds, oh.
Well, I guess my question is, are you looking for new IET programs to be developed through this grant, or can we use current IET programs that we have and have them funded through this grant?
No, my understanding is they do not have to be new programs.
Mm-hmm.
However, we cannot what's the word, supplant, not supplement. If you
Mhm.
have funding already available that is funding that IET program, these funds cannot be used to supply, to cover those costs. If you do not have funding, then it can be. I do not think it does not have to be a new program. It can be one that's already approved.
Right.
And these funds can be used for those who have not started an IET before or created an IET before previously, to create one.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Mhm.
So another question, Julie, is the total grant amount dispersed over 3 years, or is the amount given every year?
The amount is given every year. So for instance, if you applied for $150,000 grant and you were approved, you would receive $150,000 with the understanding that if the funding we receive goes down or whatever, you would receive that for 3 each year. Is that clear? So it's not just 150 over 3 years, it's 150 each year.
Yep, that makes sense, Julie. And then just a clarification I think has been clarified in the chat, but can you clarify when the start date for the first year would be? There was confusion whether it starts in 2023 or 2022.
It starts in 2022. We are hoping to have the funding available July 1st of 2022.
It looks like, excuse me, it looks like those are all the questions we have in the chat at the moment. Oh, here, there's another one. Are there preferred or recommended grant proposals in terms of programming or instructional strategies MDE or this grant is looking for specifically?
Grant programming or instructional strategies. I would say around that this grant opportunity does include the integrated education and training approach. And that has several requirements around it that, for instance, the training and education must be offered concurrently. It can't be adult basic education services or English language services for 3 weeks and then move into training for 3 weeks. That it would not be allowable. It's supposed to be offered concurrently. So there are specifics around that instructional approach. And for those who are interested in learning more about that, you can email me, or I believe there are opportunities and have been opportunities through professional development providers to provide guidance on what that looks like. And then as far as programming that has experienced success that could be replicated, there are a lot of programs that have previously been funded that have been very successful. The COVID has made it difficult to provide some of the services, especially for individuals with beginning literacy skills. But overall, there have been some really great programs out there. And I'm trying to think success. this grant opportunity is really an opportunity for people, if they have not tried the integrated education training model before, that this would allow them to try to have that. You have to have the IET in place as you write this grant. So you have an understanding of what it would take to do this type of work. And I'm just, sorry, I'm reading the chats as well. In-demand employment opportunities. So there is a question that, do you have further clarification about what is considered in-demand employment opportunities? I would lean to your career force partners in understanding that. I could tell you in-demand employment opportunities currently, anything in the healthcare field is going to be considered in demand. And also, I think IT and manufacturing, but depending on where you are located in the state, there may be high priority in-demand employment opportunities that take more priority over those. So I would always reach out to your career force. Individuals. Also, DEED has staff that are available to help with that as well. And I was also going to mention that with the application, remember that the people reviewing these grant opportunities may not have a background in adult basic education or in English literacy. So be concise and clear, and when writing this grant, and don't assume that you're speaking to someone who is familiar with adult education. Are there further? Hoping that could be. So I see Jason has a question. Oh, sorry. We are very interested in applying, but are hoping to find examples that we could base our grant on so as to build on previous successes of other more experienced IELCE grantees. There are current IELCE grantees. There is a list of these grantees on the mnabe.org website. If you look under grant opportunities, grant and funding, you'll find a listing of these programs on that site.
Julie, just a note that I just put the link to that in the chat. So yep, for those who want information about currently funded grants, that link is there. Okay,
thank you. Oh, and I see that Brad has also added a great one about in-demand career pathways. Yep, in the local WIOA plans. Yeah, thank you. And again, I can assist individuals if they're wanting to find out who their career force director is or who might be able to assist them with that information. I can connect them to their career force director.
Also a note that our colleague Patsy at Atlas has put some links in the chat to professional development resources around IET, integrated education and training. So those could be useful for those of you who are developing IETs as well.
And I wonder, Patsy, do you mind sharing a little bit about the resources that you put in the chat?
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, so I just put a couple things in the chat there. One was the link to the YouTube channel. We have an IET playlist. So, you know, just as there's a playlist for all things related to EBRI and things related to career pathways and things related to other subject areas. We have an adult career pathways playlist and then a subset just related to integrated education and training. So as that's a component of this grant opportunity, if you haven't had a chance to view any of those webinars, they're available. And then another thing I dropped in the chat is under our resource library for adult career pathways at the Atlas site, we also have a section specifically for IET. And one thing of note is that there's a new IET toolkit that was recently completed at the national level that we've linked to there. And then this Thursday, Christine Kelly and I are doing a session specifically on how to write a single set of learning objectives, which is a component of IET that we're exploring and learning more about, and are excited to share what we know and work through some examples with folks who are able to join us for that session. It's Thursday afternoon. I can drop the link to the events calendar as well. And then other things coming up, just keep a track of that newsletter and the events calendar. There are more IET opportunities coming up in the spring.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Patsy.
You bet.
And then one other thing I wanted to note is that traditionally in Minnesota, the Integrated English Literacy and Civics Education Grant used to be known as the Civics Education Grant. And it traditionally went to serve refugees, immigrants, and those with beginning level literacy. When the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act passed in 2014, they expanded that group to include professionals with degrees from other countries who just need English literacy skills to gain employment. And so that is a new category for people to consider when applying for this grant. It can go just to serve individuals who, again, may have been trained or have degrees from other countries and are just looking to improve their English language skills. And to be clear, if you are targeting one population, please be very specific about the population that you plan to target with this grant. That's one of the questions within the grant opportunity, and it should be very specific. Any additional questions?
So another question from Jason, Julie, an example I think that they're thinking about, they're seeing a very large need for medical interpreters, have many families who need support in interpreting, or support is needed in interpreting for families at medical offices. Would something like a medical interpretation certificate pathway work for IELCE?
Yes, it would. It sounds like a great opportunity. You've identified a need, and it would be definitely something to consider. Just making sure that as you build that pathway, the integrated and education training components are met. If there aren't any further questions, what I think we can do is end the recording and stay on a few more minutes. And if people have further questions, again, email me directly, and all the questions will be posted by February 11th in the same area where you find all the other grant documents. For you to consider in writing for this grant opportunity. Thank you for your